Okay, I'm going to try my best to give you some small video, maybe 10 minutes long, to help you get started. Sometimes we procrastinate on something that seems like overwhelming. So I'm going to guide you through the AP World History DBQ guide that I sent to you that was part of your agenda. So if you look at this part, this link, Guide to Writing the DBQ, I'm going to walk you through that. So what you might want to do at home is open the agenda I sent you, click on the Guide to Writing the DBQ, click on the Peer Grade rubric, click on the alternative rubric, and then you'll have all the things that you need more or less open. Okay, so when you go to the guide for writing the DBQ, which I hope I didn't just close out. Oh man, no, here it is. Okay, great. When you go to that, it'll go over what we've already learned in class. So typically I suggest a 5 to 6 paragraph essay. That's not the end all be all of essays. You can do it in a different way, but this is just a nice way to organize your ideas. Remember, the first introductory paragraph is going to be maybe larger background information. That might be a place that you put historical context for the question. It's definitely where you're going to put your thesis and your grouping sentence. So if all you have in that paragraph is a thesis which answers the question with 2 parts, probably about 2 parts, because remember there's a change to the new DBQ where they only have 5 documents, so it will be hard to group, do more than 2 groups. But you can even just have 1 group that answers the question. So I would have your thesis, and then you would have your grouping sentence. So a grouping sentence would look something like, let's say the question was, what were the causes of World War I? And you made a group, and the group with the documents is one cause was international rivalries. Okay, imperial rivalries, fine. So then you'd say that as your thesis, and then you'd say imperial rivalries led to World War I as seen in documents 1, 5, and 6. That's a grouping sentence, period. And then you put period and you start. So let's say you had 2 groups like that, one cause and then another cause, and they both had documents grouped together. Then you could take those 2 separate statements and make them the topic sentence of your first and second paragraph. Okay, so I'm going to go over what it sort of looks like. So again, I want the thesis first, followed by a grouping sentence where the groups match what is being asked for. Again, I gave you the example of, if it's the causes of World War I, you think of, 2 causes of World War I, you put the documents together for an economic cause or a political cause, and then those are your grouping sentences. I would say now this is what we're going to do for our class. It's not how every class does it. It's not how other students in other schools do it. It's not maybe even how Mr. Hammond's class does it, and that's okay. This is just a technique, a way for you to if you haven't quite found your own style yet, you can use this as like a foundational style. Okay, so put your thesis and then put your grouping sentences. That's first paragraph, you're done. If you want, you can add historical context there, but there's always room for historical context later, elsewhere. Okay, in the first body paragraph, I want you to start with a topic sentence that's a part of the thesis with the documents group. That's your topic sentence. Remember, it has to answer the question. Then you're going to add 2 to 3 pieces of evidence used to argue the topic sentence. Now, you're lucky. On a DBQ, the evidence comes from the documents. Make sure you say, in document 1, it shows that blah, blah, blah was the cause, and then bring it back to your thesis. You can also just say what document 1 says and then add document 1 in parentheses to reference which document comes from. Then try to add at least 1 piece of outside evidence that fits in that paragraph. So if the paragraph is about political causes of the war, add a piece of political evidence that's not in any of the documents already. So try to add a piece of outside evidence and then do a sourcing. Sourcing is what we call FIA or happy. Remember, P stands for purpose, H for historical situation or context. Situation is narrower than context. I is for intended audience, and A is for author's point of view. Now, we can't just say, what that is. We have to say how it affects the document as well. So it might take 2 to 3 sentences to do sourcing. And you don't need to do every part FIA for every document. You just need to do 1 part FIA for, a couple documents. So we'll go over the rubric later, but for now, you can go over the rubric, and I sent you a video about the rubric, but you can see that. But when you do sourcing, remember to spend a few minutes explaining how 1 or even 2 of the FIA categories affect the document. So I gave you an example as related to the pandemic because we're all thinking about that. Let's say there's a document by an epidemiologist, and he's saying everyone should follow the stay-at-home orders. Well, you could say something like, document 1 is written by the author of document 1 is an epidemiologist, someone who studies diseases, and who is very knowledgeable about pandemics. From her point of view, and likely with a desire to save lives, so now you're combining point of view with purpose, she might believe it necessary to take extreme measures to stop the virus. That is why document 1 so strongly urges Californians to stay home. So you notice the sentence I said how that affects the document. Try to stay away from the word biased. You can use the word biased, but it doesn't really help explain why the document is the way that it is. You kind of want to say that. So for example, if the author of the document is trying to appeal to a particular audience, say they're trying to appeal to Republicans or to Democrats, you want to say, oh, this is why they're saying it this way. Maybe because Democrats believe such and such or Republicans believe such and such. So you're trying to explain why the document is the way that it is. Also, it's not always a bad thing. Sometimes somebody has a lot of familiarity or knowledge or experience. Like if they're from a town and they're talking about that town, it could be that they're biased and saying things that aren't true, but it could also be that they're knowledgeable and they know more. So remember to think about the positives and the negatives, and potentially explore that. Explore what that person's background is, whether it's their education level or experience, all of that. We've talked about that in class. Okay. Then somewhere in the paragraph, also try to do historical context. The pandemic broke out amidst building mistrust between the United States and the nations of Russia and China, and then explain, why that's relevant to something about your paragraph. Or for example, if we go with the current pandemic, there's a lot of mistrust about technology, this latent or hidden mistrust about technology, which explains why some people in the UK are, destroying, the cell phone towers because they're afraid of 5G. So that would be relevant historical context, fears about technology. Remember, historical context is different from historical situation. Historical situation might be pertinent to a particular document, like a war just happened, which that still could be context, but something that's smaller that explains why a document is the way that it is. Okay, so we talked about that in class. Hopefully you remember. Do 1 to 2 more body paragraphs just like this for whatever the next grouping is. So let's say you have 2 causes. Pretend it's a cause and effect essay, and they ask you for 2 causes of World War I. First paragraph might be political causes. Second paragraph might be economic causes. And do the same thing. Put your topic sentence, put evidence, put outside evidence. Do FIA, do historical context, and you're probably going to be fine. And then if you can, do another paragraph. And you might want to do an extra paragraph just on historical context or just on sourcing to try to get those points. When you get to your conclusion, restate your thesis in a different way. And then maybe try to say how that's going to affect the next time period, whatever the next time period is. Or you can make a connection to how this is similar to another place. Maybe they asked you about Afro-Eurasia, but you can talk about how this is similar to the Americas. Or another time period. That would also be beautiful. And this could count towards complexity. Okay? You don't have to have a super complicated thesis. Your thesis could be very simple and it can answer the question. In fact, your thesis could just be one part. Whatever they asked you, you answer. I prefer you do at least 2 parts, but you don't have to have a very complicated thesis. And don't forget that last point on the rubric, the complexity point, is very difficult to get. So you can get a lot of the other points without having to do a super complicated thesis or argument. And then in this guide to writing the DBQ, I listed the videos I shared with you earlier, so you can watch them again. And then you've got to open up this 2019 DBQ. It will take you to the actual documents. When you look at the documents, you want to scroll past these other questions, or not DBQ questions, and then get to this section where it says, it should say DBQ somewhere right here. Document-based question. Now remember, all of this is off because now they've changed the rubric to make it easier. I shared with you a rubric. This is a rubric that Mr. Hammond recommended, and this is one I made for you. So remember, you're going to need a thesis or a claim. Context is still a requirement. Evidence is still a requirement, and then it gets a little bit confusing because they're trying to give you more points for doing less. So you only have 5 documents, and you need to use 2 of those documents correctly. So using is not the same as arguing with them. You could, for example, the document could have a graph of the amount of deaths from coronavirus going up, and you could say the amount of deaths increased as seen in document 1. That would be using. But to get argues, you'd have to put that evidence into an argument of some sort, like to say something like coronavirus is deadly. Or if you want to say it's not deadly, then you'd find evidence for that argument as well. I would say, so using is different from argues. We've talked about that in the past. You've got to explain how whatever is in the document proves your point. You could get this part wrong if the graph showed the deaths going up and you said it was going down. You could misunderstand, for example. So this should be pretty easy, what we call like low bar. In a way, I'm not supposed to use those words, but pretty easy to access. You only have to understand 2 documents and show that you understand them. That's an easy point. And then if you argue with those 2 documents, if you take those documents and make an argument of some sort, like you say what that proves, that will give you another point, an additional point. If you use evidence from 4 documents and argue with 4 documents, that's another point. So that's 3 points already. Then there are 2 points now for evidence beyond the documents. So remember, these have to be pieces of evidence that are not found in the documents already. So you don't ask for something you already have. And they have to relate to what you're talking about. So it's a good idea to think of anything that's related to the topic at hand. Okay, and then the last points come from sourcing, which is basically doing FIA, and they're just basically making you do an additional FIA. So make sure if you do a FIA in every paragraph or 2 FIAs in every paragraph, and you have a separate, when I say FIA, I mean sourcing paragraph, that you should be covered. You should be good to go. And then the complex understanding is really difficult. We've talked about all the ways you can do that. If it's a compare and contrast essay, do comparisons and contrasts a lot and have a lot of FIAs and have a lot of great evidence. That could be enough to show deep historical thinking. Or say in the middle of a compare contrast essay, you also do something that's changing. So you're showing multiple historical thinking skills. It could be that you have a complex thesis, although that's very difficult to do. It could be that you make a connection to another time or another place that fits and that shows that you have a depth of understanding. It could be that you did multiple amounts of sourcing. Look through the ways that you can do complexity, but right now I would focus on the other points that are not super hard to get, and if you can get those points, you'll do really well. So I went over the rubric, which I wasn't planning on doing, but there you go. And here's the other rubric that might be easier for you to understand. I'm not going to use that one because it's not mine, but you can look at it. Okay, so when looking at the 2019 DBQ, I want you to ignore that first part because remember, it's not correct anymore. Look at the rubric that I taught you. So it says, evaluate the extent to which the Portuguese transformed maritime trade in the Indian Ocean in the 16th century. Always remember that 16th century is going to be one behind. So remember, if it's the 20th century, it's the 1900s. If you just remember that one thing, you'll be able to figure out all the others. 20th century, 1900s. So 16th century, that means 1500s, okay? Then remember, the Portuguese are in Europe, and it's asking you, transform. Transformed is a change word. It's asking you, evaluate the extent to which, how much did the Portuguese change maritime on the ocean trade in the Indian Ocean? So right away, this gives you historical context because you're like, oh, I know about the Indian Ocean trade, and I know about the Arabs and the Indians and all the technology it took on the ships to enable that to happen. So that can be historical context right there. Talking about technology, talking about Indian Ocean trade, talking about the Muslims that were part of this trade, and then the Dar al-Islam, and you have lots that you can say already that you're thinking of. And anyway, the Europeans wanting to get spices. You can talk about all of that. Okay, so there's a map, and it shows you, where some of this trade is taking place. And then you'll have the documents. So let's just do one document together. Document 1. So it says, source, advice given in 1500 by the Muslim merchants of Calicut to the Hindu ruler of Calicut concerning the arrival of the second Portuguese expedition to the city. So this is from a Muslim perspective. It's from a Muslim merchant perspective. So when I'm thinking about doing FIA, I'm already thinking, oh, I could use like author's point of view, potentially his purpose as a merchant to protect his own interests, and see if there's anything in the document to support that. Recorded in the history of the discovery and conquest of India by the Portuguese by Fernão Lopes de Castanheira, a Portuguese historian, published in 1551. Okay, but this is also now, it's advice from a Muslim, but it's being recorded by a Portuguese historian. So potentially that could have impacted it. It could have been used for the purpose of the Portuguese historian for some reason. We have to look through the document. Anyway, you're going to look through the document and you're going to see what it's saying. You're going to do this for all the documents. What I want you to do, I linked this for you. There's sample essays and commentaries. And what you can do here is you can look at what it's at. You can do this yourself, but since you're practicing and just trying to learn, you can look at what they say. It's possible for a thesis, for context, for evidence, and it gives you all kinds of examples. But then I want you to get down to these documents. And you try to figure out what the document's saying, and then see if you got it right. They're going to give you a summary. They're also going to give you 2 ways that you could potentially source the document or do FIA. Okay, they may not give you exact examples, but like a potential idea of how you could do it. And then they'll give you more examples, and what's even more awesome, they'll give you unacceptable examples of thesis, context, how to use evidence. And then even the best part of this, they'll also give you examples of student essays and how someone did this. And this, it is not that you have to copy this method, but gives you an idea of how you could do your own. And at the very bottom of this, it'll tell you how that student got the points, how many points they got and how they got the points. And it's a really nice thing to do before you start thinking of your own thesis. Right now, you're not having to do it on the spot, so why not look at what somebody else said? It'll give you, the score for sample 1A and why it got the score that it did. So you can look at, oh, what could I have done? Why did they get that point? Why didn't they get this other point? And then, adjust your own writing style to make sure that you come up with your own ideas and also get the most amount of points possible. So if you do this, it should be a good place to start. I don't want to read the documents to you because it's going to be a really long video, but I wanted to just jump on and say, hey guys, this is what you would do. You'd open these things, you'd look at the rubrics, and then just start going through the documents. And you don't have to be in it by yourself with these documents. You read document 2, and then look, what did they say about document 2? And use that to help you, because right now you're just learning how to do this. So it's like, okay, what did I see it as? What did they say it was? And then this will give you ideas, and then you'll be able to, once you get more comfortable with just the structure of the writing, you'll be able to do this better and faster. Now remember, you're going to have to type this at home later on. So there's only going to be 5 documents. For right now, we're going to do 2019 DBQ with all the documents, but in next week, I'm going to cut down some of the documents I want you to use and make you practice again with a different DBQ. And every week, I'll make it slightly more challenging or more similar to what's coming. But for now, there's no reason to be stressed out about it. Look at what other people have done. When you're learning how to dance, sometimes it's helpful to look at other people's moves until you find your own style. So I hope this was helpful, and I hope to see you in class tomorrow. Thank you very much.